to a channel that's got about 1,000 subscribers. So
okay, I'll finish this beer and put it away.
Okay, we're live. We're live now. We are live. Okay. Excellent. So okay, I wanted to put this on. Share screen. Yeah, I was hoping to put the stream on Facebook, but I'm just gonna have to let that go. Okay, all right. So we're joined with Anthony Migchels from Holland, a usury abolitionist, legitimate, who has a blog called The Real Currencies. I forget the full domain on that, Anthony. What at blogspot .net?
Realcurrencies.wordpress.com.
Okay, and his blog is currently blocked on Facebook. You can't even share. I mean, think of that. Your blog is about monetary reform.
Mm-hmm. I was pretty taken aback actually, Wayne, when this happened a month ago or so, because I've been blocked on Facebook many times, but it was always about the cultural Marxist kind of stuff, that I also discuss, regularly. But I've never found any censorship by Facebook about concerning usury. And I have a fairly well visited page, Real Currencies, also on Facebook. I've never had any problems there whatsoever, none whatsoever. And suddenly I just couldn't even link to my own blog anymore. And really all sorts of racist and anti-Semitical blogs, etc., yada yada, they can be painlessly linked to on Facebook, but mine about usury and just a few weeks before all this started unfolding. So I'm not the paranoid kind of guy, but it's hard to avoid the impression of there being a link.
Yeah, because Anthony and I, we're monetary reform people at heart, but what happens is we end up getting into other topics because that's what everybody's focused is on, all the symptoms rather than the root cause, which is the money system. The money power is at the whole core of all of these things. So if you're to go back 12 months and once a month, there's a boogeyman of the month, the scare of the month thing. And right now it's the virus. The month before it was the impeachment. And then there's the assassination of the Iranian general. And then there's the me thing, or Me Too, or whatever. And all of these situations are symptoms of the money problem. And so we talk about, we'll do a video about talking about the last time we did a video, it was on the yellow vest protests in France. And it always comes back to the same solution. And at that time with the yellow vest movement, we're trying to, make sure that, if you're going to join a protest, that you're not joining a color revolution, meaning it's a loyal opposition revolution, which has no intention of doing anything to threaten the money power. So I like to do everything I can to threaten the money power at all times. Because it's fun to poke the lion, or whatever you want to call it. This is I don't even know what the date is today. Today's the 22nd, so it's the big high holiday for 3/22. March 22nd is 3/22 for the Skull and Bones or whatever. And in the State of the Union, the state of the world is. I just went driving out, and they're out of eggs at the grocery stores. They're out of most bread. There was lines for sanitary wipes for babies and that kind of thing. They're out of toilet paper. So there's real, like, this is the first time I've ever gone in my lifetime that I've gone to the store and not been able to buy eggs. I've never experienced that before in my life. So there's I went and by the way, the restaurants here I went to my church, which is closed entirely. They're doing some kind of online thing. we're Sabbath keepers, so we really believe the biblical Sabbath, but we take our kids just to have some social interaction. We had a neighbor Christian over that has young kids, and we invited maybe like 12 families that normally have been here before, and most of them didn't even respond about the crazy idea that we would congregate. And these are Christians. These are Christians. And I had one show up, and I thanked him repeatedly for being a dragon slayer, because he, in a way that most people don't even understand, he partially, just a tiny little bit, he and his son slayed the dragon yesterday, because he came over, and our children had an absolute blast yesterday. We had a blast. And I think the biggest issue that we're dealing with isn't even the monetary reform, is the fear of the debt slaves, that they won't even look at any options other than options which are presented by the dragon itself. Your comments?
Well, Wayne, interesting description there of your first-hand observations of daily life and how it is currently being impacted in your area, and it's pretty much the same all over the West. And the different levels of escalation. I mean, in several states in the United States, and also several major European countries have locked down. And this is.
What's the difference with a lockdown? Does that mean you can't go outside at all, or what do you see? You know, what's going on in Europe?
In Europe, let me first frame this, Wayne, as what is actually going on here, because I think we should not be under no illusion. This is not just the next distraction. This is a massive power grab, a massive communist banker power grab, and this is a overture, we might say, of a tremendous historical development, and this is a before and after moment, and things will never be the same. And what we're currently seeing with this incredible panic about absolutely nothing, and we will be discussing this, is unprecedented, has never been seen at any time in world history, and never ever before has the state ever been able to lock down entire populations, all in all hundreds of millions of people, locked down in their own homes, the streets patrolled by the military, people demanding that the government does more and more and more to distance us socially, 1.5 meters between us, not going out, even in places where there is not a complete lockdown, where people are not locked up in their own homes. They are being told to not enter the streets unless necessary. Many, also in the United States, many shops and stores and what have you have been closed down, or can only operate under limited conditions. This is the state is obviously absolutely trashing even very basic things like the First Amendment and its right to assembly. And this is a shocking development, and people are in a complete mass psychosis about absolutely nothing. Worldwide, 12,000 people have now died of corona over the last 2 months, which is, worldwide, which is during the peak of the flu season, which is, in terms of numbers, absolutely, totally nothing. In 2009 alone, in Holland, a minute little country with 17 million inhabitants, we had a flu season with 9,000 more deaths than normal. All people dying for some reason. Nobody even knows why this flu season took 9,000 people more than average, but it happened. Nobody cared. Most people didn't even notice. It's completely normal that there are occasional peaks. In Italy, which is being touted as a huge hotbed of corona, with now something like 6,000 deaths, all people who are average 80 years old, suffering from major other ailments like heart failure, cancer, all sorts of infections, yada, 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 are being, 5,000 people. Let me tell you that in 2017, during the flu season, 24,000 more old Italians died of the flu that year alone, more than average. While we are now talking about 5,000 people of corona, all people 80 years old, as I've already stated, and the entire country is in a total lockdown. People are not allowed to leave their houses. Everybody is in a state of shock, of panic. The army is out in the streets, and it's a complete hype that has been created by the media entirely. Also the alternative media, because the alternative media is simply goading people who know that the NWO is there, and they are being fed fear porn about the NWO bioweapon depopulation virus. And this is why many of the woke have been demoted to crying little babies demanding that Big Brother locks them up in their own homes. That is what has happened the last few weeks, which is why it is so shocking. And this is not just another day in the week. This is a major Bolshevist takeover, and what is happening is that the bankers who rule the West, they are now switching from open capitalism to a communitarian system, what they call a communitarian system, which will see a huge impoverishment all over the West, huge state overreach in the entire economy, a basic income, and this is combined, of course, with, we will talk more about that, the unbelievable historic financial collapse that has been unfolding since September last year, and which will, without a doubt, within the next few years, kill off the petrodollar as the main currency in the world. And this is what I would consider the start of the end game of the New World Order.
And basically, just like at one time the world reserve currency was the pound, and then with Bretton Woods in '47 it changed to the petrodollar. They're going to move it to the BRICS nations, China, whatever. And the U.S. has been. This is something you don't hear enough people talk about. But whatever nation has the reserve currency status, everybody has to buy that currency in order to buy petroleum. And if it's a petroleum economy, it artificially increases the standard of living of that host nation. And the standard of living of Americans is just going to drop significantly. You know, it's hard to predict what that is, but it's going to be massive.
It's going to be enormous, historic. It's going to be a meltdown. Let there be no doubt about this. This is Great Depression territory and worse. And the United States will never recover. This must also be clear, because this is simply, you know, they have been attacking the United States for decades, and we have been seeing that the United States empire was in decline massively already for decades, and we have been discussing about how the money power had been subverting, and how they have been destroying the West from within, the United States, or Europe also, of course, but very much the United States. And the United States is going to be demoted from the hegemon to just another great power. It's not going to be completely nothing, but it will never be the same. And this is what we can predict now already. And I do expect, I'm pretty sure really, Wayne, that in the times ahead, in the years ahead, at least until 2025, we will see many, many incredible, unprecedented shocks on the way down to the next level. And I will also remind people that there were about 10 years between the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929 and the eventual outbreak of World War II. So we will see at least as much economic pain in the West in the years ahead, and it's really not very difficult to predict that things will not be getting better in terms of authoritarianism, fascism, communism, these kind of things, and obviously the potential for war. Yeah,
and the thing, you know, during the Great Depression, like how this relates to monetary reform is, number one, during the Depression, money was extremely scarce, just like money is scarce now. And because of that, there were, in the US, there were 3,000 local currencies. And that was during a time in which Americans were, it was still largely an agrarian society. So the people were much more rooted into the land and knew how to fix stuff. They knew how to build stuff. They knew how to farm still. So the impact of scarce money was diminished because the people were much more self-sufficient. But when you're not self-sufficient, then money becomes a bigger and bigger player. And they've, over the last 80 years, 100 years, they've removed us from the land and our self-sufficiency. And, you walk around a store and and by the way, I don't know how to farm. I'm building a chicken coop right now. And I spent $150 on now I'm at like $400 with the materials. And we've had the chickens for about 4 days. So I've got about $400 into the whole thing, that meaning the chicken and the wood for the coop and all that. And we've gotten 1 egg. So, it's no nothing because the stores are out of eggs. So now you're like, I'm gonna have to figure this out. It looks like. This is where we are.
Yeah, this is as good a time to learn as any, Wayne, and you have a few months still before everything really comes tumbling down. So better make the best of it. Mm-hmm. But having a few chickens in the garden is not a bad idea. But in general, I can tell you that we are facing the implementation of Agenda 2030, and a core issue of that is that more and more people will be driven to the cities, and the countryside, which has already been depopulated to a very high extent over the last 2-3 centuries, will face a huge deflation, and local economies in the countryside will face a crushing deflation, and many people will flee to the cities.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit, Nat, about how the money power has the ability to get everybody concentrated in cities? I always make an analogy. It's like a water sprinkler, when it emits water, and everybody, it's currency is the lifeblood of survival in Babylon, mm-hmm. and it brings everybody in, and I don't hear enough people talking about how it's so unnatural for us to be living on top of each other in these skyscrapers or even in these planned cities, these grids.
This is let me give you the short historical outline. You know all this, but for the viewers, what happened is that, and you hear nobody talk about this because nobody realizes this, but that's my job at Real Currencies, to show the impact of money on what actually happens, and this is one example. What happened is that in 1694, 6 years after the Glorious Revolution, which was the takeover by the merchant class of the old guard in Britain, the old medieval guard, which had already been severely weakened, obviously, by the Cromwell Revolution 50 years earlier. But at any rate, the Glorious Revolution of 1688 resulted in the founding of the Bank of England in 1694. And until 1694, the British economy had been financed with what they called tally sticks, wooden sticks. Bill Still has talked about this, and other people have. And this was just sovereign money created by the British king, and they broke two sticks, and they marked these sticks with a unique identifier. And because such a thing cannot be copied, so people would bring it in, and the king could recognize it because he had the other side of the stick. And this is why people could pay taxes with it, and how this money circulated in the British economy and financed the entire British economy, which was already a leading economy back then in Europe. And the original shareholders of the Bank of England bought shares into the Bank of England, were paid with tally sticks. But the first thing that the Bank of England did was inflict a gold standard on the British economy, and started taking out all the tally sticks out of circulation. And
well, that's good, right? Well, they must have had a lot of inflation, and they needed the gold system to bring stability, right?
Well, the tally stick had been operational for literally centuries, many centuries, and there had been no inflation and no problems whatsoever. And it allowed the king to finance himself sovereignly, and later Parliament as the sovereign, the follow-up sovereign of the UK. And with the Bank of England, with the institution of the Bank of England, the government was no longer sovereign, but was forced to borrow funds from the Bank of England. And well, they implemented their money, because gold is the banker money. I mean, this is one of the core themes of my website. I mean, you know as well as I do how we have argued with the libertarians, both of us, Wayne, and about this evil money of the devil, gold. And the bankers inflicted this gold standard on the UK and on the British economy. And what next happened is that slowly but surely, long-term deflation over many decades entirely crushed the countryside economy that had existed there for many centuries, and which had allowed the British people to live as freemen on their own lands. Okay, they were still in a serf-like situation with their landlords, but they lost about 10 to 20% of their income to rents and taxes, and still were able to work their own lands and pass on their lands to their sons, and live there for many generations. And this deflation utterly annihilated the countryside economy, and this eventually led to the great disaster known as the enclosure of the commons. And this is when the British people were driven off their own ancestral lands, and this is when the working class was created, and this is how capitalism started. And it led to an immense impoverishment of the common man, and he was relegated to the cities, and he was forced into forced into renting a place to live in instead of living on his own land. And he was forced to start looking for a job instead of working in his own land or being a self-employed craftsman, which was the norm in those days. There were no wages in those days, Wayne, except for the simple-minded and the young. And men like ourselves, we were all self-employed, and wages were, you know, they were in very low esteem. And if you didn't make your own living, you were considered to be a borderline retard. Yeah, that's how things were until then. And the working class was created, and people, you know, and especially in America, many people believe that capitalism made us rich. Nothing of the sort. Capitalism destroyed the economic, the socio-economic situation of the medieval era, which was based on usury-free economics. And it led to a huge impoverishment of the people, and this process is ongoing. In Ireland, for instance, after 2010 and the breakdown of the tire economy and financial collapse of 2008, again saw a huge deflation in the countryside of Ireland, and hundreds of thousands of people started moving to Cork and especially Dublin, where most of the Irish people live. And services were slashed, all sorts of local outlets where people could go were destroyed. Social life in the villages has been minimized, and people have become very isolated from the countryside, and the local economy there is in a state of disaster. So this is what will happen in the decade ahead. Also, you will see that there will become a huge impoverishment all over the West. It's going to be disastrous. Let there be no doubt about that. And one of the side effects will be that, especially the countryside, will be completely annihilated, and people will be herded into the cities. And this is exactly the plan and what they have in mind for Agenda 2030. So
I guess because right now one of the it drives me crazy when I see it is there'll be guys that are Trump supporters, and they'll say, oh, you know, Trump is going to end the Fed and he's supporting a gold standard. Why? You know, can you give 3 reasons why? Why is a gold standard bad? And because we've been programmed, oh, end the Fed, end the Fed. I'll organize end the Fed events. I've gone to them. I've attended them. The Federal Reserve is evil. But if we end the Fed, why isn't everything going to be hunky dory? Describe that a little bit mathematically. I typically explain it with usury. It doesn't matter what the form of the currency is; they still can foreclose on you. So why is gold standard bad?
Let me first state that the Fed is dead. The Fed is not going to get through this at all, and will just be torched and will be sacrificed as a scapegoat. And this has been the plan for a very long time. I've written about this very extensively. I've predicted this clearly and openly, and this is what will happen. The Fed will be just butchered, and they will be blamed for everything. And the Fed is just banker policy, because the bankers have seen this coming for that many decades, of course. So,
a controlled demolition. just like 9/11.
Demolition, and all they're doing with the Austrian economics and libertarianism is create the controlled opposition that will be calling for the reforms that they have always wanted. This is their standard modus operation. So this is what they're doing now as well. And the gold standard, the bankers, as I just described, came on the scene in capitalist Europe with a gold-based Bank of England, and they have run all the gold standards that have ruled Europe throughout modernity. And the idea that bankers hate gold is just completely moronic for anybody who has even the most basic knowledge of banking history. Bankers have always controlled all the gold standards that we have had up till now, and obviously they will control the gold standard that will be coming. And they have switched between gold standards and credit-based currencies throughout the 20th century. They left the gold standard in 1914 to finance the First World War. They got back on the gold standard in 1925 under Winston Churchill, when the pound was still a reserve currency. John Maynard Keynes at the time predicted that this would directly lead to the Great Depression, which it did, and which it was supposed to create, because gold, and let me now answer your questions. The first thing why bankers love gold is because it is incredibly deflationary, and deflation is a constant redistribution of the producer classes to the parasitical classes, from those who create value to those who have money. And why? Because in a deflation, money becomes worth more, but everything else becomes worth less. So if you are the money power and you have all the money, that's very nice, because what you have becomes worth more, and working people see their wages go down, and what is even more important, during deflations, the values of debts go up because the value of money goes up. So when you sign up for $1,000 debt, and next year this dollar is worth $1,100, this thousand is worth $1,100 in purchasing power, and next year $1,200 in purchasing power, and next year $1,300 in purchasing power, which is what is going on during deflations, then obviously this is a huge cross on the shoulders of labor, and this is what they are creating with the gold standard. So that's one thing. And the second thing obviously is, listen, if the bankers lend you a gold coin, or they lend you a few dollars printed on paper, next year they will be getting back the same amount in coin or in paper with 5% extra, usury. That's how they operate. That's the core business of banking, is lending at interest. That is what banking is. So they can lend at interest with gold. That is there. That is not a threat to their operation. And what is going to happen now? Better. I mean, people have signed up for trillions of debt in Fed dollars, and easily printed Fed dollars. And when there is going to be a gold standard, they will be paying off this debt in gold. That is what they are creating, and obviously this is just a joke, and this is the magic of banking, and people are completely bamboozled about these things. They don't understand these things, and this is how they have conquered the entire world, Wayne, with this ignorance of ours and this simple game and this simple trick of compound interest. And people nowadays are such experts on exponential growth all of a sudden, because we have this virus that is exponentially growing and will kill us all in 2 months. But if they can see the compound interest exponential growth, that is something that they might want to actually keep in mind, okay? Because that is actually important.
Yeah. You think of all like the student loans are out there that can't be forgiven, that were easy. Here's students here, and they're just real easy money. And now you got to pay back with hard money, and without the ability to go bankrupt or absolve it in some manner under Mann's law. There's going to be such suffering. So there's a couple reasons why gold is bad, and it's just like it's amazing to me when, like, here's like a whole different angle on that. I always say, when I would always bump heads with libertarians on the gold, like promoting the gold system, I would just say to them, like, well, go ahead and start a gold system. Let me see you do it. And like, do you have enough gold to pay the police for a year? One policeman. Do you have enough gold to pay one policeman for a year? And they're like, well, no. Well, how do you have enough gold to pay to have one highway plowed for a year? Like, no. Well, where does it come from? We don't have it. Like, I lived in Breckenridge, Colorado, which was founded on gold mining. It was founded on gold and silver mining, but there's no gold and silver. Like, we'd go hiking up in the mountains, and we would cross over streams, and I would look for it. I didn't see any gold the whole time I was there. You know? And you're living in an area where it's founded. The town over is called Silverton. You know,
like 1% of Americans have gold, Wayne. Something like 1%. It's a joke. What is even worse, and this is also fairly widely known, nobody really believes that the United States government has 8,000 tons of gold sitting in the Federal Reserve. Nobody believes that. The United States government is over. It's completely kaput. And they have not an ounce of gold. And all gold that lies in Fort Knox, if there is any left, has been rehypothecated many times over. And what you have also seen going on is that the Fed has been suppressing gold prices because they don't want gold to break out before they decide it's going to break out. So they have been suppressing gold for about for many decades now. You can read about this on data.org. These people are pretty famous for their gold suppression exposure. They have been doing it the last few weeks also. That's why gold has been going down a bit over the last few weeks. But the point being, they have been suppressing prices. So Russia and India, and especially China, over the last decades, their central banks, but also privates, have purchased enormous amounts of gold. Nobody knows how much, but people speculate that China might have as much as 30,000 tons of gold. But they have purchased enormous amounts of gold over the last decades, and they have clearly been preparing for the gold standard. And at subsidized prices subsidized by this Federal Reserve gold suppression. And this has been a huge subsidy by the Federal Reserve for a wealth transfer of astounding magnitude from the West to the East. So this, people continue to refuse that banking is the real world government and the real hegemon in the world. But this is how they operate, and this is what they have been doing, and this is really tell all about the real situation in the world. Central banks, they help each other. They're all on the same team. They are the new world order. And the Federal Reserve is going to be destroyed, of course, yeah, but people must understand that for the money power, the Federal Reserve is only a vehicle. They will destroy the Federal Reserve, and they will implement another vehicle that they have been preparing for many decades. Nobody else is going to prepare to implement their vehicle. No. The bankers are implementing their next vehicle. And this is how they operate, and it's always the same. They when they create opposition, the opposition will make some decent points about the problem, and then next propose a solution that the bankers already want. You see this in Marxism, you see this in libertarianism. This is how they always operate, and they attract people in with a basic problem description that is semi-plausible, and then next have them call for the solution that the bankers have been wanting forever. And that is what libertarianism and gold buggery is all about. But I can't really see anything else happening than the implementation of a gold standard, and really quite soon, Wayne, because I think we're already quite close to a terminal crisis of the dollar. Just today, I can share a screen here, and I will do this. Here, can you see this? Federal Reserve to lend?
Not yet. You have to share it, and then you have to hit the application window. There should be a screen, because it gives you, like, you might have 5 things on your computer. You have to pick which thing you want to share.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, share your screen, and then go here. I don't even know why I have this. Oh, well, okay, it's too much of a bother, Wayne. I won't bore the audience with my technical inabilities. But the point, what I was going to show is that the Federal Reserve at this point, today or this week, has announced that they will be supporting banks on the repo market to the tune of $1 trillion per day. Okay, so I mean, and this is just short-term loans on the repo market. And what's going on there for people who don't know, the repo market is where banks go at the end of the day to they have to balance their books every day, and if they're short of cash, they go borrow from each other to balance their books. And this is a completely normal operation. This is what they always do. But last September, the repo market started hiking. The interest rates there started hiking to 10% suddenly. And this is because the banks stopped lending to each other. And if they can't borrow from each other, they can't balance their books at the end of the night. And then they will have to go into technical bankruptcy. So that's a very serious situation. So the Fed has been bailing out the banks on the repo market since September. But originally, they started with 75 billion here, 100 billion there, a few hundred billion next. They're now in 1 trillion per day territory. And the next question is, how much of this money is actually coming back? Because the Fed can easily say we were lending 1 trillion a day, but if the banks won't lend to each other, then you can assume with 100% certainty that the collateral that the banks were offering each other was no good, and that they're technically insolvent. And if they need that kind of money from the Fed every day, you can be very sure that they won't be able to pay all this money back. So there's some black hole somewhere in the financial system, and everybody knows it's probably the derivative bubble that is probably causing all this, and that is sucking up hundreds of billions per day at this moment, and that's what we're facing. So the situation is terminal and of immense geopolitical concern. And obviously, Wayne, the link must be made between the timing of this corona outbreak and what is happening on the financial markets and with the US dollar. And let me make another point here about this, Wayne, before I go into this link between corona and what is going on. Listen, you and I discussing these matters, people will think, oh yeah, that's just Wayne and Anthony. Who the fuck are they? They're just a couple of nobodies, which is correct. But people have been predicting the collapse of the petrodollar for 30 years now. So people are wary, and people have a boys cry wolf kind of thing. But let me make this very explicit point that in September last year, Mark Carney, who is the head of the Bank of England and an absolute top kingpin of the international banking cartel, openly announced in a major speech, in a very small confab to his colleague central bankers and a few others there, but a very major speech, he announced the end of the petrodollar and dollar as world reserve currency. Within 10 years, he said, okay, that's a timetable I won't put my hand in the fire for, but I can absolutely, totally guarantee you, yeah, that in a major confab like this, that the Bank of England, the boss of the Bank of England, openly announces the end of the US dollar as a world reserve currency. That's an official announcement, okay? People always want government announcements for this or that. This is a government announcement. This is the announcement by the world government itself that the petrodollar is going to be replaced, and not by the yuan, mind you, but by an IMF-controlled world reserve currency, which is another thing that conspiracy theorists like ourselves, Wayne, have been saying for many years, that this is the end game of the New World Order, the implementation of a world currency under their control. And Mark Carney in this speech announced that this was going to happen within 10 years, okay? And not only Mark Carney, but also Vladimir Putin, a few weeks later, somewhere in October or November or whatever, openly announced, literally said, the dollar will collapse soon. And Putin is not bluffing. Putin is not just saying something. He's the president of the Russian Federation. Everything, every word Putin speaks is 100% strategic. He knows exactly what he is saying. And he is saying the dollar will collapse soon. Okay? So it's not just you and me. The most powerful men in the world that we know of are openly saying this is going to happen. So I want to make this very clear, Wayne, because people do not take this seriously. They think this is all a joke. They think, oh yeah, that's just alternative media fear porn. I'm just giving you the facts as are in the public domain, and that people have no doubt about the seriousness and the gravity of the situation. And now about this link to Corona, I mean, this collapse of the dollar that is now unfolding, and they are absolutely torching the dollar, by the way, because they last week they also threw 700 billion, not in the repo market, which is officially coming back, even though I don't believe that, but in asset purchasing programs. So they're printing 700 billion fresh dollars, and they're going into the markets and buy up anything that is looking distressed. And this is going to blow up the U.S. the Federal Reserve balance sheet even much more. The Congress has just in another package in the new budget has given the Federal Reserve permission to widen its balance sheet another further 4 trillion. So it's standing at 4 trillion now. They're allowed to go up to into 8 trillion territory now. I can guarantee you now already that within months this will have proven insufficient, and that they will have to size up their balance sheet even more. And this is the situation that we're now into. And just as this is unfolding, all of a sudden we have Corona and this massive state power grab, where they're locking down hundreds of millions of people all over the West into their own homes. And like I said, riding with the army through the streets. And this is coinciding. And I think that nobody can be under any illusion about coincidences. No, this is a very major power grab at the beginning of what is a huge historical collapse that can only be compared to the collapse of the Roman Empire, what is now coming.
Yeah, yep. I was in terms of the isolation thing, Hollywood does predictive programming, and I think, this is the ultimate level of control is they just want us for human batteries, and really not even all of us, just enough to keep the machines going, and they plainly state they want to do population reduction by 90%. So this is from the Matrix movie, and we're being told to self-isolate so that it's much more difficult for the money masters to they have a human farming operation going on, and when the people are strong and they collaborate with one another, it's more difficult for them to enslave us. But when they use the pandemic as an excuse, they isolate us, and it's a war with no front. Like the enemy, so-called, is everywhere, and it turns into everyone. Like when I was walking in the store, probably 10% of the people walking around were wearing masks. So they're bought into all of the fear porn. When the real and here's the thing is, like, right now we're just promoting more fear about the dollar collapse. And that's why I want to get into solutions, but it's a real thing. Like, the real suffering is from the economic side, not from the virus.
You're correct about that, and you can. I feel you when you say that, and it hurts me when you say that, because the last thing I want to be is a fearmonger, but I'm being a realist here, and people are not being realistic yet. And this interview of ours will be heard by a very small group of people, but it will be very aware people, and they must have no doubt about the gravity of the situation. But obviously, this is not the end of the world. The world will keep turning, and there will be very many opportunities, and many people realize that some sort of cleansing is necessary, because the situation was already completely unsustainable. And I'm not talking about UN sustainability, I'm talking about actual sustainability. And I do not want to be into the fear porn business. And to correct a little bit of that, I want to tell people very explicitly, don't be afraid of any virus, because nobody is going to die of corona except a few old people who are already dying of very severe other ailments. And go out and hug each other. Give each other a good big hug, because that is exactly what most people right now need, far more than anything else. And we exactly as you say, Wayne, the state is in an absurd fashion forcing people to isolate, fear pointing them into keeping distance of each other of 1.5 meters in the public domain, forcing people to stay in the house, making people afraid of each other because there is an invisible enemy. But the only invisible enemy of the New World Order is gold, Wayne. Let there be no doubt about that. And there is nothing to fear of any coronavirus. It is, what I believe is that it is impossible to kill people with a virus, but that's an entire other story. What they are doing is this so-called pandemic is a complete media and state fabrication. There is nothing to fear for anybody. Go out, have a good time, say fuck you to the state, because this is a total takeover. And what we need now is people to rise up and to just laugh it off. And you know, we had a good time together because part of all this is that people are enjoying the unity that this seems to bring. They're all enjoying being socially responsible by keeping distance of each other. But this is misdirected love, but it is a loving intention of most people. But they must snap out of this fear because it is completely uncalled for. And you know, it's painful to face that we have been taken for a big ride, but it was we just been taken for a huge ride, Wayne. There are a couple of people at the height of the seasonal flu dying. They are 80 years old. They have many other ailments, and they are all being written off as corona. But what really happened is that the only thing that you can really say of the situation is that corona is an opportunistic infection, and most people who are severely ill from cancer, from whatever, ultimately die, not so much of the disease itself, but exactly of such opportunistic infections. This is daily life. Okay, and we're talking about 12,000 deaths worldwide during the normal flu season. At least 1 million, but probably a couple of million people worldwide die of the flu, mostly old people. Okay, so people can seriously calm down now.
Yeah. So the corona thing, it's hype, just like Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was created in a lab, just like the virus. It's just a magic trick. It's a misdirection. Look over here while we'll pick your pocket. And so what commonly happens is when we criticize the dominant system, which they call capitalism, they automatically, in this Hegelian dialect, well, if you're criticizing capitalism, that means you're communists or socialists or whatever, which we are not. We promote biblical economics as the solution to this. And
we have to support free trade. Instead of allowing a few money power morons with their usury to control all trade, all production, all living. We want really free trade. We don't want parasites sucking off our production, okay? So, yeah. And that has nothing to do with communism. It's the exact opposite of communism. And this idea that you're either a capitalist or a socialist, that's really for complete primitive minds. And that's not at all where we are at.
Yeah, when people say that, what I always try to say as a simple thing for them to, well, what do the Amish practice? What sort of are they capitalists or are they communists? Which are they? How about the American Indians? Were they capitalists or communists? Right, and they were neither. Neither of they're self-sufficient, and I don't know what you'd call that. But what the money power says, oh, they're just so primitive. We can't do that. That's just too primitive. Like, well, what's going to happen to the U.S.? It's going to be taken into a very primitive sort of society, except for the technology to surveil everybody. You know, there'll be technology for the elite, but it'll be very destitute for a large portion of the population until we rid ourselves of this money power. And that's really the everything ends up, these problems can all be overcome once we shed this parasite, which has taken control of literally everything. This little dragon has grown and grown and grown and grown because it keeps feeding us loyal opposition revolutions, which only serve to destroy us and empower the dragon. So we're at 49 minutes. I'm trying to keep it at an hour.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah. Yeah, what I would like to do, what I feel very much inclined to do now, Wayne, is give a very, very short historical issue, which is absolutely completely fundamental for also where we must be heading. Because I'm not proposing that we go back to the Amish. We can have advanced societies without parasites, and this is how. What happened after the end of usury prohibition in Europe? Because we must understand how we came here to understand how we get out of here, okay? And this is how we came here. What happened in Europe without usury is Catholicism, the Catholic Church, forbade usury. But what they did not do, they did not provide interest-free credit. And as a result, there was no interest, there was credit scarcity in the economy because there was no interest-free credit provided by the community, nor by the Vatican, nor by the state, nor by local authorities. And on the other hand, the rich wouldn't lend because usury was prohibited. And the rich, as Francis Bacon at the time said, have hard hearts, and therefore they won't lend without usury. And this is why people like Francis Bacon, but also a man like Calvin, of Calvinism, of Presbyterianism, why they said, okay, we have credit scarcity and therefore usury must be permitted. And this next happened. So usury was readmitted into Europe. And what this did is that widely in the economy, credit became available. And this created all sorts of economic development. There were also problems, but it did create economic development. And this is what you have seen in capitalism, so-called economic growth. But what it also did is that through the usury, the moneylenders usurped all this production and all this wealth that was being created with the money that they were lending. And this is why banking has become so incredibly powerful, because they financed everything that was going on worldwide. And of everything that happened, they got this huge chunk of the added value through the usury. And this is why now we have, and this is why we have been hearing 500 years of economic growth under capitalism, while 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck and have zero assets or less, have no assets at all, only debt. Okay, so this economic growth is all with the very richest, and this has also been shown last decade. The rich have doubled their assets and incomes over the last 10 years, while all the rest has been going down. And what we propose is the implementation of credit, because a society needs credit, and people are foolish to say we don't need money, we don't need credit. We do need money, we do need credit, but we do not need parasitism. So what we want is interest-free credit, so that all this economic activity by normal people can be financed. And in this way, we can build huge civilizations without parasitism, without money power, centralization of power, without parasites living rich while people toil and sweat. And we can have an economy in this way in which a man works 15 weeks per year, can feed his family, no plutocracy, abundance for everybody, a huge emancipation of working, well, because people refuse to face how poverty and wage slavery barbarizes people. But there will be a huge emancipation of people when there is usury-free credit and in an advanced society. There needn't be scarcity. There needn't be economic backwardness. We can have a good economy, wealth, a comfortable existence without parasites. And that's what we're proposing.
Okay. And so how does that work? What's the transition look like that this could be done? And the one good thing that happens in these instances that people feel pain where they start to want to investigate alternative solutions, because like you're saying earlier, most of the alternative media is just a subsidiary of the dominant media. So they're not really, they're giving loyal opposition solutions. On one side, it's the libertarian side where they're promoting Bitcoin. A quick mention, why is Bitcoin a bad idea? Or not a sufficient idea?
Now let's just call it a very bad idea, okay? It's the most trashy money that I've ever seen in my life. It's even worse than dollars or euros or gold. And why? Very simple. I mean, it's just all mindless speculation. There's no real financing of real trade in the economy by Bitcoin. I mean, there's something like 500 billion market capitalization of Bitcoin right now, and maybe a few billion in real commercial trade. So I mean, that's completely insane. The only reason people are into Bitcoin is for buying Bitcoin, stashing them away, hoping they will get worth a lot more tomorrow. And people are foolish and they think speculation is bad when bankers do it, but it's good when I do it. Okay, speculation is bad. We don't want speculation. We need a monetary system that makes speculation impossible. We don't want parasitism, and we want stable prices. How can you have stable prices in a Bitcoin that goes like this? I mean, they just shed 50% of their value just the last few weeks. And also, of course, people who are hoping that Bitcoin was a good hedge in times of inflation. Well, there you have your hedge. I mean, it's been annihilated. And admittedly, I mean, Bitcoin has seen many crashes and has also often rebounded. But people must stop being foolish about Bitcoin. It's a total nothing burger. It is also very clear that blockchain is now being rolled out by the IMF, by Facebook, by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel. So I mean, the money power has at least co-opted blockchain. But you know, I have no doubt whatsoever that blockchain was created by the National Security Agency and other agencies.
It's not that Japanese, mysterious Japanese guy or whatever? Is that what you're saying?
1998, for the record, in 1998, the National Security Agency published a paper which basically described that the need for a peer-to-peer currency which would solve the privacy issues, yada yada, of money. And 10 years later, we saw Bitcoin. So that's really all I need to know.
Yeah. Okay. So Bitcoin non-solution. So the fluorine, how is that doing recently? Are you getting more interest or more activity, more transactions? How's that going?
Yeah, we're definitely getting more traction. Also because I have a very dedicated. I mean, the Florijn is a very dedicated team working, and people we've been working together with for a couple of years now, and people know that we are in the market. Our main aim simply has been not to go out of the market because it's an uphill struggle, Wayne. Let me be very honest about that. It's not easy connecting businesses, getting trade flowing, but we have about 130 businesses right now, and there's something like 600 private individuals. And I have no doubt, and I've been waiting personally for years for this to happen, and I have no doubt that in the years ahead, the Florijn will become very important for very many people. Or, well, no doubt, that is my hope, and that is what we've been working for.
Is it scalable? Like what do you envision? Because the fluorine is a digital currency exclusively. It's not physical.
Well, that's only because it takes a fair bit of logistical organization and management to create paper-based currency. But I'm very, 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 very strongly in favor of paper-based currency because obviously people need to be able to pay cash, so that no state, no bank, no supervisor whatsoever can monitor any transactions. Not because people have something to hide, but because the state has absolutely no business in any transactions between people. And we really don't need their big nose in our economic life. And so obviously we need paper money, and we will be able. And if the Florijn grows a little bit and becomes starts creating an income, so that we can cover our costs, then we will very quickly start implementing paper-based options for payments as well. But for the time being, you can pay with your smartphone and online from a computer.
Okay, so it's basically a smartphone app. More or less, right? Sure. So how does it work when a company, say, if you got a contact and let's say, I have a pool company, and I lived in Holland. I said, okay, I want to participate. What would I do? What's the process?
It's very simple. You sign up. You can open an account in 5 minutes. As an entrepreneur, for a private individual, you can do it in 1 minute. we need a few bits and pieces of information, like the name of your business, your address, your name. For private people, we demand very little information. You can actually open up an account anonymously if you want. But for businesses, we need basic information. So that takes a few minutes to fill out. But then you have an account and it's immediately operational. You don't need to be validated. You have a basic right to participate in the Florijn. And next, if you want credit, the basic assumption is that if you're a credible debtor, if you have credit, if you have a decent credit score, then you will be able to get credit as a business. With this limitation, namely that obviously we cannot in a small network circulate millions of credit. That's not going to work out. I mean, that would inflate the currency and see a crash. But so we can only give out credit relative to the amount of economic activity in the network, and currently that's simply very small still. So we can't do much credit yet, but the challenge for us and for the network and for everybody who needs money in the times ahead is to build the network, cooperate, and work together in building up this network, finding more places where you can pay more, start spending a larger part of one's income in Florijn, and then slowly but surely the amount of credit that we can give out to our participants will grow and grow. And this is how we can secure ourselves in the years ahead. And everybody throughout the West, you know this, Wayne, I just want to be on record with this. People who actually want to do something can do nothing better but to start a currency like this. There's nothing more essential. This is all about deflation. It's all about less and less and less money in circulation in local economies. And this is how they are crushing us. And what we can do, we can simply add our own currency. We can add our own liquidity, our own working capital for businesses. And this is exactly what we need to do. And people who have the vision and who have the entrepreneurial skills and the marketing skills, they are needed more than ever. And I'm offering everybody to consult with hardcore interest-free economics. And I have plenty of expertise. I can help them with the essentials, because the breakthrough in the Florijn obviously is that we are the first unit that is entirely interest-free credit-based and which is convertible to other units, to banker units. Excuse me. And this is the great breakthrough of the Florijn. And people who wanting to get into this business must understand that this is a huge breakthrough, and that this is also the huge limitation of already existing units. They are either convertible to dollar and euro, or they can supply interest-free credit. But there is nothing else in the market that can do both. And it's absolutely essential for high-class working capital in the years ahead, that it provides plenty of credit, and interest-free credit, of course, and that it provides convertibility to the banker unit. This will be absolutely essential in the years ahead. And I can consult with them on how to go about this. And I'm offering to do this if they are serious and capable.
So like I'm just I'm going to break it down. Like, just imagine like it's similar to a Let's system, except for that Let's doesn't have convertibility. So basically, so an individual joins, like, let's say, or my business. Let's say my business joined, and I would look at the various vendors, and let's say there was a company on there that was a trucking company, and I could buy sand. I buy sand, right? So right now that's $500. So I would basically, I would pay that company $500. And now I'd have an account that was negative $500, because I have to go earn from somebody else that buys a pool or whatever, and then they pay me back in a florin. And by the way, most of my installations are about $500, so it kind of makes sense. So then somebody else contacted me. Let's say it's a private individual. They're having to isolate in place, so they're going to coop up in their house, so they're going to build a pool. And I can build the pool. They start off with an account that's zero credit and zero debt, like it's just a zero. Now they pay me $500 in fluorine. You know, I know it's not dollars, but just to make it simple for people to understand, then they would be negative. They pay me, and then I just pay down that debt.
That's all.
It's innovated barter. It really is just innovated barter. What's going on? Just as any.
Let me just suggest this to you, Wayne, because this is all good and well, and it's important that you explain this to the people. Very good. But I'm offering you, let's do another interview this week, and I'll work on finding out how I can share screens, and I will simply show people how money creation is done in an Excel sheet, and I will show the whole thing, and I will show everybody how money creation essentially works, so that you get a real visual of what is going on and how mind-numbingly simple it really is, because people are completely bamboozled about what money creation is. But it is absolutely nothing. A 12-year-old can do it. I mean, your little boy can do it, Wayne, if you can instruct him properly. I mean, how old is he? 4? That's old enough to run to create money. So how about that?
Yeah. I just the way I made a video called the Chicken Note, and to basically explain the same thing. It's basically the concept of money creation is 1 barter equals 2 IOUs. And normally what happens is you get a knee-jerk reaction from something, oh, that's a debt-based currency, because no money exists unless you have a debt. And
the issue is not debt, the issue is usury on the debt.
Exactly. Right. So that what the bank has done is propaganda, and they're blaming the debt as opposed to blaming the usury, so that people reject this solution. So just imagine, you know, for the viewers there, you have we're doing a trade. I have 15 silver dollars and you have a gold coin. So historically that's a trade. So the money isn't the commodity. The money is, as soon as you and I agree for that trade, I owe you a gold coin and you owe me 15 silver dollars. So 15 ounces of silver and 1 ounce of gold. The IOU is really the commitment. That IOU is actually the money. And that's as simple as it is. And it's hard for people to, like an IOU, you can't rely upon that. And then that's the core of where generally libertarians will condemn a system and say, oh, you want a money system based upon IOUs. That's what we have right now.
Yeah, we have one right now. That's true. And that's also why people should understand that it can work, because it has worked for decades. And the only problem is usury on the debt. And of course, vampires will inflate and deflate. But that's not because it's complicated. That's because they're ghoulish criminals. That's the only reason why they inflate.
Well, and it's the parasites that are issuing the money instead of the producers.
Yeah. The complete psychopaths. Of course, they abuse the monetary system to the absolute max, and of course, they're inflating and deflating and calling it the business cycle. I mean, yeah.
So I guess that's real. Like, it's so important that how is money birthed, and is to break it down in the most simple ways possible. Is to really get to the core of it. So that video, the Chicken Note, I think that's one of a good tool to kind of figure that out. Because if you take all the money away and you just have a chicken and a loaf of bread, well, what do you do? I'm hungry and I want the chicken, and you need bread for your chicken sandwiches. So we agree to make a barter. I owe you a chicken, you owe me a loaf of bread. The IOUs are the money. So if you're out of bread today because you're going to be making it tomorrow, we could trade the IOU, and now I can use that same IOU for the loaf of bread and give that to somebody else that makes baskets or something, and then they can redeem that IOU. So it's effectively just like a restaurant can issue a gift certificate, and it's much more innovated in the fluorine, because this IOU concept is important to understand, because like when somebody goes to get a mortgage, the real monetary creation is when the borrower signs the promissory note. That's the real security from a flesh and blood human being. Not the corporation isn't making the money. The flesh and blood human being, when they sign the promissory note, that's the real, that's when credit cards are signed. the human beings, the human component of money creation is essential. And that's what creates, like, can you talk about like labor-based currency and how that relates to all this kind of thing?
Well, labor-based currency basically is a less effective way of saying the same thing. But what it's all about is what you're saying is that the promise to pay of the one who's going into debt, that is what upon which the entire monetary system is built. This is the nature of credit. It's not just the promise to pay of the debtor. It's also the community who says credo, which means I believe. So there is an interplay between community and debtor. And it is not so that that all individuals can just give out promissory notes as much as they want. That's not true, because that would lead to price inflation. So the monetary system must be managed by the community and in the common interest. And the common interest is that we have stable prices. But the promise to pay is the basis of money creation in a credit-based economy, and we need credit in the economy. This is the lifeblood of any economy. What we don't need is usury on the credit, allowing absolute parasites who add nothing whatsoever to the productive process to take most of the added value. That's what we do not need. What we also do not need is absolute criminals inflating and deflating at will and calling it whatever, market forces and fundamentals. What we also don't need is stupid people thinking, oh, we can delegate these things to Big Brother. That's the people slowly but surely will have to awaken. But until they do, people like ourselves, Wayne, have this opportunity to create honest money. And gold is not honest money. That is dishonest money. We want to create honest money. We don't need gold. We don't need investment. We only need an Excel sheet and a database in which we can keep the score of the promises to pay and the transactions in the economy. And that's all there is to it.
Okay. And I guess go into like a bigger, like the story for humanity. In Europe, when like the movies that you see in Europe, do you generally see the Hollywood movies, or do you watch more European movies, or how does that work?
We've been culturally totally taken over by the United States. I mean, even the French have a Disney World, so that tells you all you need to know, really, Wayne, about how it is here. Of course, we have. I must say that Hollywood has been in decline, but French and Dutch and German filmmaking has been in decline also very much. And generally speaking, of course, art in the West is going through a grave crisis and is absolutely moronic and of a most debased kind imaginable. And most of what we see here is just the same trash that you guys see.
Hey, you're criticizing America. So,
I really hate America. I hate the flag and I hate the empire and I hate DC. So I really hate America and Americans.
Yeah. Why do you hate me so much? So, when the movies about the future coming out of Hollywood, it's about global pandemic, like World War Z, zombie apocalypse kind of stuff. So I have a 4-year-old and I have a 2-year-old, and I want them to have a future. But if everybody's mind is occupied by a future which is being controlled by the same money power, and the movies that they promote are about a zombie apocalypse, basically, and and technology taking over, where it's like Terminator movies or the Matrix, where the machines and Elon Musk characters, they create machines that they take over humanity, and our humanity is replaced with these cyborgs or whatever. There's really no movies, or the other thing that they promote is that we basically trash this planet like Avatar and we go to some other planet and do the same thing. So in terms of a future story that we can bite into, that we can wrap our minds around to, that, hey, and when you get into story is like, when in the past has this financial tyranny destroyed a society, and then the people rose up and they collaborated and they overcame that money power. So I think that's where the Bible comes in to give us a history. So history is prophecy. that we can manifest. Because until we buy into and believe in a better story, it's kind of like all of the local currencies, they don't have, that's where it gets into the vision. We need a collective, a collaborative future story where we're not just the way the Bible describes it. We're no longer the tail, we're the head, where we can determine the future, as opposed to these guys plan all of these calamities and we just kind of go along for the ride. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, as you said, they've been predictably programming the people with what is coming, and I think it's fair to say that from what Hollywood is showing, you can glean a fair bit about what they have in store for us, and also many of the tricks that they actually play on us. Because they're quite honest, really. I mean, there was this film, for instance, it was a B movie, but it was a very important one because it was about a pandemic, and you've had many of these films, but this is just another example. And in this film, they were talking about a virus, you know, and everybody was dying. But the ultimate plot of the film was that it was not the virus, but the vaccine that was killing people, which is what we're dealing with, because people won't get killed by a virus. What happens in history, you had the plague, for instance. This happened during what is historically known as the bullion famine. And this was a huge deflation, which led to a huge impoverishment. And in Europe, it was the late medieval era. And this set up the people for disease. You saw this also in the German concentration camps at the end of the war. The economy had imploded. The people were all cramped, low autoimmunity, starved. And that's when typhoid and diseases like that become manifest, you know, cholera and all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of condition under which people get sick. But if people are healthy, if there's basic hygiene, if there's a reasonable diet, then people are not going to get sick of a virus and not going to get destroyed by a pandemic. So this is just one example, but what we need to understand, and I think that this is actually more an answer to your question, Wayne. What I think is very important is that there are a number of things. In the first place, people must understand if we solve usury, if we solve debt, if we solve this basic part of the economy, then already 90% of our problems are over. Because if you do not have plutocracy, if you can work 15 weeks per year to feed your family, if normal people can invest in their own business, if there is no wage slavery, I think that most people will agree that most of our problems have been solved with just that. Okay, so that's just the end of usury. But what I think is also very important at this stage of the game is to understand is that people are getting divided and conquered. Over the last few years, everything was about migration. And people were being set up against each other, and the migrants are invading, and there is a global jihad, and there is a Muslim invasion in Europe, and there's a Mexican invasion in... No. The Muslims were being destroyed by Zion, and obviously this created a lot of movement, and a lot of this fallout of these Zionist wars was simply much of this fallout was simply dumped on Europe. What the American empire has been doing in Latin America is beyond ghoulish, and I think it's very painful for many American people still to face what exactly has been done in their name, because American people associate the flag with the community that they had, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, before capitalism started trashing everything in the United States. That's what people in America associate with the flag. But the rest of the world associates the United States flag and the stars and stripes with bombing campaigns from the air, annihilating millions and millions of people. They associated with impoverishment, with hamburgers, you know, $1 hamburgers that kill you and do not feed you. They associated with gangster rap, okay? They associated with trannyism. That's what the rest of the world associates the US flag with. And this is painful for Americans, but this is the truth. And what we must start to understand as whites, but as all the peoples of the world, it is not about whites and Christianity versus Islam. That is what the New World Order wants for us to do, a clash of civilizations. What we must understand is that it is all the peoples of the world that are being destroyed by debt slavery, by migration, by invasion, by all sorts of machinations of all what we see every day worldwide, and that they are getting destroyed by the same enemy, which is the banking cartel, which is the New World Order, which is the central authority that already controls the world and that is currently in the process of consolidating this control in a world government. And it is us and normal Mexicans and normal black men and normal Germans and normal Russians and normal Han Chinese against the Communist Party in Beijing, against Washington, D.C., against the city in London, against the Vatican, and against all these other central institutions of the New World Order, the United Nations, of course, the European Union. These globalist outlets, these are the common enemy of all the peoples in the world. And of course, what the New World Order is, who is behind that, I prefer at this stage to avoid that question. It is centered around the banking cartel. That is their means of power. Whether it's who is behind it, that is a secondary question. We know that their means of control is the bank, and the bank is who owns everybody, and that is what we will take down, or we will be taken down by them. And Lord Acton, who said absolute power corrupts absolutely, also said the issue that has swept through the ages and that will have to be faced one way or another is the people versus the banks. And this, Wayne, what we have now is the final showdown that is coming.
Yeah, in terms of like story, this is really a showdown. And when I look at it, it's like the stakes keep getting, because we keep kicking that battle down. We don't fight the battle, this monetary battle. We kick it down the road, and then the symptoms get worse. The immigration becomes worse, the debt slavery becomes worse, and then they create new boogeymen like the virus and Al-Qaeda, and they just get more and more creative with their schemes and fear mongering. Though all the symptoms, so until we face the money power like Jesus, it's just amazing to me. Like that is the only time just Jesus gets violent is one particular group. But in the meantime, if you spoke to 100 Christians and you know you were going after the bankers, they would be critical of you and not critical of the bank. Has been my experience. So that's
a troublemaker.
right. Yeah, that stinky hippie. To me, it would be the first group of people that would kill Jesus, returning Jesus, would be the Christians, because they're the ones that are most kowtowing to the dragon today and trying, basically seeing the dragon says isolate, and they can't wait to isolate and then criticize anybody who refuses to isolate. So it's the Christians are completely, their minds are completely beholden to the dragon that Jesus fought. So that's what I mean in terms of the story. And once the story captures people, they're able to get their mind to be on the right team, and that requires that you become a dissident. You become a dissident relative to the society, and most people aren't willing to go on to that road to Damascus, because how much sacrifice have you endured in your life in terms of friends and family and income and everything else, because God has called you to complete this mission, to serve in this manner, which I'm honored to do it. I'm glad that I'm doing it, because I wasn't really living properly prior to this. But I'm sure you've made many, many sacrifices and a lot of disdain from many people, and very few people listen. But it seems to me that this is all going to come to head now, because if we don't change, it's just going to be more and more and more pain, more and more pain.
Listen, Wayne, there are two religions in this world, and the one religion is the love of money, and the other religion is the love of God and each other. These are the two religions. Every other religion that you have is categorize either in one or in the other. By far, most people love money. And this has been the human condition for many, many, many millennia. And when push comes to shove, most people will want to make a buck easily at the expense of somebody else. And very few people will forego a buck if they think it will hurt somebody else. And this is where we're at. And in the coming years, we will see a huge escalation of the price that we pay for this love of money. And people will face immense suffering, let there be no doubt. But it will be a challenge for them. Are you going to continue on this way that you're on, or are you going to choose for each other? Are you going to sacrifice for others, or are you looking to exploit others? And in my view, and I think in the view of any serious man, you should also take into account where we're going after death. And I can tell you this, that people who love money and who take from others without giving back, and who prefer to exploit than to sacrifice, these are not going to be the people who are going to end up in Jesus' lap, even though they call themselves Christians and have said, Jesus, Lord, save me, and next go work for the bank. That's not how this game is played there, Wayne.
Yep. Okay, any final comments? We're at almost an hour and a half now. But it's necessary. There's so many topics. It's money touches so many other, it touches every other topic, and we just need a better story. That's what I've focused.
What we have is like I said, 15-hour weeks, 15-hour working weeks, or 15 weeks per year. We can have a society in which the vast majority of the people has a very comfortable lifestyle, plenty of free time, plenty of interaction with our colleagues and friends and family, plenty of nature to live around because there is no overpopulation, complete garbage. Humanity lives about on 5% of the available land. That's the reality, Wayne, okay? Because we have been herded already into very small plots of land, and huge, immense land holdings are being held away from us by the enclosure of the commons. In Britain, which is a very small and immensely densely populated country, and a highly advanced country, 5% of all the people live on 5% of the land. And this is the same everywhere else. And so there is no scarcity. There are easy solutions for everything, but we must get away from Babylon. We must get away from our faith in Big Brother. We must learn to respect truth. We can no longer afford easy answers and thinking, oh, let experts do it. Because our system, our government, the power structure that is visible in the world, and the beast system is the banks, the states, the media, the academia, the supranational institutions. That is the beast system. That is the New World Order. That is what the New World Order is. That is what they control. That is how they rule us. We can no longer afford allegiance to this system and to these people. And this is a very, very difficult choice, and a very hard nut to crack for very many people. And most people won't make it. That's also what I believe. But this is what we face now, and things are never going to be the same, and everybody should be prepared. And there are great opportunities, because it's not all bad, but we are facing immense upheaval. And that is the realism that I first want to implant, because it's very easy to now go for the hope. And I see this in many people. They talk, oh, but this collapse had to come, now we can rebuild. No, it's not us that are going to be rebuilding their way. They are reforming their system. People who think that they have going to have influence on that system are completely delusional. Okay, they are being demoted to not from debt and wage slaves to outright controlled slaves in communism. That is what they're now facing, and it will only get worse until we start getting serious about the things that I've been talking about many times now over the years, and today the last 90 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time, Anthony. And it's always helpful to have someone that that gets the grand scheme all the way, because it's like on the micro level, you got to know what's going on, but you got to know what's going on in the macro, and there's just, and the history. There's so much information that comes into making wise decisions in these crises that that you don't buy into the hype. But in the meantime, you're not a Pollyanna either. So thanks for your time, and we'll catch up again soon.
Yes, thank you, Wayne.
Be blessed, brother.
Yeah, and you. God bless. God bless.
Bye.